And we are back for episode 6.6. Our episode begins with Meera dragging Bran and trying to escape the Whites. Bran is busy learning all of human history, and Meera apologizes that her efforts to escape were not good enough. The Whites are nearly upon them, and then suddenly a mysterious man on horseback with his face covered comes on the scene, killing the Whites and rescuing Bran and Meera. Now we are beyond the book's Bran story, but this scene is remarkably similar to one with Sam and Gilly back in the third book in the third season. If you recall, after the mutiny at Craster's Keep, Sam and Gilly go on the run, and they are eventually caught up to by a White Walker in the show and some Whites in the book. The two must escape peril, and in the show, Sam kills the White Walker, and the two simply run to the safety of the wall. However, in the book, Sam and Gilly are rescued from the pursuing Whites by a pack of ravens and a mysterious mounted man who hides his face. Only in the book, the man rides a great elk rather than a horse. We then get an extra scene of Sam and Gilly arriving at Horn Hill. The two discuss how Sam's father hates wildlings, and thus Gilly must pretend she's a northern girl instead of a wildling, as well as claim her baby is Sam's rather than Craster's. The two meet Sam's mother, who is thrilled to see Sam and her supposed grandson, and Sam's sister is there, and she complains that she must marry an old fossaway. Sam's father Randall and brother Rickon aren't there to greet them, as they're off hunting. Now in the book, Sam and Gilly never visit Horn Hill. He, Gilly, Aemon, and Darien first visit Braavos, where Sam runs into Arya, and where Darien is murdered by Arya. Sam, Gilly, and Aemon then catch a ride with a ship of Summer Islanders to Old Town, and it's on this ship that Aemon dies and is preserved in a cask of rum, and where Sam loses his virginity to Gilly. That said, Sam does have a plan to send Gilly to Horn Hill with the babe, but without him. Sam believes that his dad, being an overly macho sort, may be impressed that Sam impregnated a wildling, and notes that his father thought that he would die a virgin because of his lack of toughness. Now in the book, Sam's family is similar. His mother he thinks of fondly, and by all accounts she seems to be a loving and caring woman. Additionally, Sam does believe that if Gilly claims the babe is his mother would want to care for the baby. He also believes that his sisters, he has 3 in the book, would also help Gilly and the babe. Book Sam does appear to like his sisters quite a bit, with Tala seemingly being his favorite, as she's the only one ever mentioned by name. Incidentally, we hear nothing of any betrothal to a fossaway in the book. Sam may have some mixed feelings towards Dickon. He remembers caring for Dickon as a baby, but wonders and doubts if Dickon would shed a tear for him if he died, the implication that Dickon, being a proper son, would become like his father. We then get an extra scene of Tommen meeting with the High Septon and speaking of Margaery's Walk of Shame. Tommen is then allowed to see Margaery, and Margaery claims that she has seen the light and has become a religious woman. Of course, nothing like this happens in the book. Margaery is under the care of Randall Tarly in the book, and Tommen is a small boy. Next we get an extra scene of Sam and Gilly having dinner with Sam's family. Dickon attempts to have conversation about hunting, and Sam doesn't seem to know what to say. Randall then criticizes Sam for being too fat, and says he's disappointed that the Night's Watch didn't harden him. He is then disappointed that Sam is becoming a maester, as maesters read about the actions of better men, rather than performing great actions themselves. Gilly then proceeds to stand up for Sam, but in doing so reveals that she's a wildling, causing Randall Tarly to become furious because he hates wildlings. Sam's mother and sister then walk off in a huff, and later Sam and Gilly then decide to leave, but not before Sam steals his family's Valyrian steel sword, Heartsbane. Now in the book, Randall Tarly leaves Horn Hill during the War of the Five Kings and plays a pretty large role in the story. He is considered one of the finest generals in Westeros, and the only general to defeat Robert in the field during Robert's rebellion. During the War of the Five Kings, Randall first sides with Renly, but after the Tyrells join with the Lannisters, he follows the Tyrells' lead. Randall is a major general at the Battle of the Blackwater, and later it's Randall Tarly who actually defeats a huge number of Robb's forces at Duskendale in the Riverlands. Randall ends up defeating a Riverland house called Mooten, and forces the Lord to marry his daughter and heir to Dickon. After this, when consolidating power in the Riverlands, Randall Tarly actually briefly meets Brienne, and later Randall heads to King's Landing and is made Tommen's Master of Law and given control of Margaery. Now in the book, with regard to hunting, it is true that House Tarly likes to hunt, and would likely talk about hunting all the time. However, Book Sam was taken hunting often and knows plenty about it. In fact, his knowledge of hunting helps him identify that something is strange with those bodies the Night's Watch finds in the first season and the first book. Now Sam hates hunting with a passion, but he certainly would be able to participate in small talk conversations about it. Now, with regard to Randall Tarly's relationship with his family, it's fairly clear that Book Randall rules his household with an iron fist. In fact, Sam remembers several times where his father yelled at and scolded his mother, and we should never forget that Randall Tarly is a man who threatened to murder his son unless he joined the Night's Watch. He is a brutal man, and it doesn't seem likely that his family in the book would be able to talk back to him. Now, one huge difference between the book and the show is how Randall feels about Maesters. Here in the show, Randall is disappointed in Sam, believing Maesters to be do-nothings, but in the book the hatred goes much, much deeper. Keep in mind, Randall Tarly could have had Sam passed over for Dickon by sending him to the Citadel, but he believes that Maesters were mere servants who bow and scrape to petty lords. He believes it would be a major stain on his house, and thus he needed Sam to do something manlier. And it is implied by Sam that he thinks that he will be murdered if his father finds out that he's becoming a maester. And this is the prime reason that Book Sam has no desire to become one, unlike Show Sam. Now with regard to Wildlings, Horn Hill is in the far, far south, and we have nothing in the book that would suggest that Randall Tarly hates Wildlings. In fact, as I said before, Book Sam thinks that his father would be quite impressed with the story of how he impregnated one, that it would make Sam seem really manly. And on Heartsbane. In the book, House Tarly's ancestral sword is Heartsbane, as it is here in the show. However, Randall Tarly seems to have the sword on him, or at least he did at the beginning of the War of the Five Kings. So it is likely that the sword is currently where Randall Tarly is in the book, which is King's Landing, which is fairly far from Sam, who's in Oldtown. We then return to Braavos, where Arya is watching The Bloody Hand again. She watches and laughs at the murder of Joffrey, but seems to connect to Lady Crane's emotion, portraying a mourning Cersei. The play seems to be at its conclusion, with Tyrion murdering his father. Arya goes backstage where she poisons Lady Crane's rum, but then she's caught by Lady Crane, who proceeds to sympathize with Arya, seeing her as an aspiring actress. We then get a meta-reference where Isambaro, the playwright, breaks the fourth wall and complains about critics who think they can do better. And then Arya changes her mind and decides to knock Lady Crane's drink from her hand while outing the other actress. The waif, though, was watching the whole thing, and she goes back to ask Jaqen's permission to kill Arya, and he gives it to her. Arya retrieves Needle and then goes into hiding. Now in the book, there is an incident at the theater that may cause a problem between Arya and the House of Black and White, though it all occurs quite differently. So Arya, for unknown reasons, has been assigned to be an actor in the play The Bloody Hand, playing Sansa. However, unlike in the show, where it's a simple play of fart jokes written by Isambaro, The Bloody Hand is a more violent play written by the acclaimed playwright Fario Farrell. That's the same Farrell family as Syrio. The night of the play is also a fairly significant political event, with major shareholders in the Iron Bank in attendance, as well as the Iron Throne's representative, Harry Swift. The big wrench in everything is that one of Harry Swift's bodyguards is Raff the Sweetling, a man on Arya's death list, and so Arya, who is only 11 in the book, sneaks off and propositions Raff with sex. While Raff and Arya slip away, she murders him, and she assumes that this murder will cause major problems with Harry Swift's negotiations with the Iron Bank. Now, we aren't sure what the House of Black and White's reaction to this will be. Like in the show, it seems a few of the House's agents are there at the theater to watch Arya. No fewer than 3 people from the brothel that Arya used to frequent as Cat of the Canals are in the audience. However, it may be that the House actually wanted Arya to murder Raff to screw up the negotiations between Harry Swift and the Iron Bank. After all, the House of Black and White knew all about Arya's death list, and it's a pretty big coincidence that Arya would run into Raff the Sweetling. Or perhaps Arya had a different mission, and this was a huge coincidence. We aren't sure. That said, the theater incident in the book probably won't be Arya's big severance from the House of Black and White, at least not immediately, as in the book, Needle is hidden right outside of the House of Black and White, and Arya will need to somehow retrieve that sword. We next get an extra scene where Jaime is joined by Mace Tyrell and the Tyrell army, and before Margaery's Walk of Shame begins, they demand the release of Margaery and Loras. In the end, though, we find out that Tommen has been convinced to merge the Faith and the Crown, and thus Jaime cannot make a move. Jaime is then expelled from the Kingsguard and told that he must serve the Crown outside of King's Landing. We then jump to the twins, where Walder Frey is scolding his sons Lothar and Black Walder. Walder reminds us that the Blackfish escaped the Red Wedding and now has conquered Riverrun. And Walder suggests using the threat of killing Edmure, the Blackfish's nephew, as a way to get the castle back. We then flash back to Jaime, and he reveals that he will be sent to Riverrun with a Lannister army to help the Freys either negotiate or reconquer Riverrun. Now in the book, Tyrell forces do come to King's Landing when Margaery is arrested, though they never enter the city. Margaery is handed over to Randall Tarly, and everyone awaits Cersei and Margaery's trials. Mace and the army, though, are called away from King's Landing with the invasion of Jon Connington and the Golden Company. Mace Tyrell must march south again towards Storm's End to do battle with the Golden Company, and this is actually the last we hear of Mace Tyrell. As for a unification of the Crown and the Faith, in the book the Crown and Faith are already unified, at least in theory. The High Septon crowns the King of the Seven Kingdoms, the legal system is based on the Faith of the Seven, and there are 7 Kingsguard to honor the Faith, and they are almost always knights, that is, anointed with the 7 oils of the Faith. Now in practice, the High Septon is a puppet, that is, until the High Sparrow came along, but story-wise in the book, there seems to be little possibility of a unification happening. Now with the Freys and Riverrun, this is again a case of the show correcting itself to align itself back with the books. Jaime is dispatched to Riverrun by Cersei in the book to help the Freys deal with the Blackfish. Although this is not due to the Blackfish reconquering anything, Riverrun is incredibly difficult to take and was never conquered by the Freys and Lannisters in the first place. Blackfish was made the Castellan and never attended the Red Wedding. And like here in the show, the Freys did use the threat of killing their captive Edmure as a way to try to get the Blackfish to open the gates. And this brings us to a scene with Bran, Meera, and the mysterious stranger who rescued them. The stranger is creepily draining rabbit's blood for Bran to drink, and the stranger eventually reveals that he is in fact Benjen. Benjen actually tells us that he's undead. He was slain, was becoming a white, and then was rescued by the Children of the Forest. And Benjen then tells Bran that he must learn to control his gift in order to stop the Night King. Now, as I mentioned before, in the book, Sam and Gilly are rescued by a mysterious stranger, and this mysterious stranger turns out to be an undead former Night's Watchman named Cold Hands. And when Cold Hands drops Sam and Gilly off of the wall, he then picks up Bran, Meera, Jojen, and Hodor and takes them to the cave of the Three-Eyed Crow. And along the way, he does feed them game that he finds in the woods, though in the book it's much creepier, as it's likely that the crew is eating human meat. Cold Hands likely killed some Night's Watchmen, ones that participated in the mutiny at Craster's Keep. So because Cold Hands was a former Night's Watchman, there was some fan speculation that Cold Hands was in fact Benjen. However, a fan was able to review an archived copy of an early draft of A Dance with Dragons, and there was a question from George R.R. Martin's editor in the margin about Cold Hands. Is this Benjen, the editor asked, and George answered no. So in the books, Cold Hands is definitely not Benjen. So where Benjen is and who Cold Hands is, if anyone's significant, are both still mysteries. And finally we have a scene of Dany traveling back to Meereen with the Dothraki. She and Daario wonder how they're going to get their army to Westeros and decide that they'll need 1,000 ships. Dany then senses Drogon, goes and finds him, and then re-asks the Dothraki for their support in coming to Westeros with her. Now we are well beyond the book plot here, but in the book, Dany does often mull over how she's going to get her army to Westeros, and frankly, she has little idea. Now in the book, there are a couple fleets heading for Slaver's Bay, and this includes Victarion Greyjoys, which is 60-some ships, as well as the Volantene fleet, which is somewhere between 300 and 500 ships, but a lot of the room on these ships is already taken with soldiers. Still, if we add up all of the ships in Slaver's Bay together, the Yunkish, the Ironborn, the Volantenes, and being extremely generous, we might be able to get to around 700 or 800 ships. And there is a question to whether even that number would be enough to take Dany and her army to Westeros. Our author has been very vague on how many people a ship can carry exactly, but when Dany had an army of around 10,000, one character questioned whether 100 ships would be sufficient. Of course, whether Dany can get her army home is largely dependent upon how large that army ends up being. If Dany ends up getting tens of thousands of Dothraki along with their horses, even 800 ships might not be enough for everyone. And that's all for episode 6.6. See you in episode 6.7.